This is very comfortable.
Hello, welcome to this week's stream. Today we're joined by Oren Soffer.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. This is very cool, and I'm nervous.
It'll be great.
Good.
For those of us just joining, this is the weekly Atlas Lens Co. Tuesday telecast, but we moved it to Thursday, and our host today is B. We're joined by the fantastic and talented Oren Soffer, cinematographer. I'm Dan Keynes from Atlas Lens Co. You might remember me. And we have excellent technical production being run by B from on camera. We also have Eric Hall running technicals behind the scenes, and we also have Aldous running the Instagram live chat. So if you have questions for Oren, wow, what a movie. First of all, the creator.
Definitely.
So we got to see it last Friday.
What format?
We saw the IMAX screening at
Excellent.
AMC Burbank here.
Fantastic.
Beautiful
good
downtown
screen.
Burbank.
Good screen.
It was
good
maybe
format.
the biggest projector screen I've ever seen. It was very impressive. Yeah.
Have you
We
been
gotta
to
take
City
you
Walk?
more.
You got to go to City Walk.
No, I
We got to take you to more screenings.
Okay.
Yeah, you gotta go to City Walk.
Okay.
But the one in Burbank is fantastic. Can't go
It was
wrong.
great, yeah.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Thanks for watching it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I wouldn't miss it for the world. It was. I love science fiction, and I love Gareth. I love Greg's work. I love your work. So really exciting to see
Yeah.
that film. It just blew me away.
Thanks. Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk about it. There's a lot to discuss. A lot of Atlas history enmeshed with the film. So yeah, there's a lot to get into. But I'm excited. And yeah, check it out if you haven't seen the movie yet. If you haven't seen the movie yet,
Absolutely.
still in premium formats, at least for another week until
Highly
Taylor
recommend
Swift.
it, yeah.
Taylor Swift's going to take all of our
Really?
IMAX screens next week. So you got like one more week to see it in IMAX.
Get in while you can.
Get in while you can, for sure.
All right, so for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, how would you describe it? How would you sell it? And, you know, for the conversation today, so people can still get something out of it.
Yes. Well, The Creator is an original science fiction epic, not based on IP, not based on pre-existing material, not an adaptation, not a sequel, not a reboot, which is extremely rare these days, and is like the type of movie that I grew up loving and that Gareth grew up loving and Greg and I think all of us, and we really miss those kinds of movies, so we made one. Yeah, I mean, the story, pretty straightforward. It's your classic post-apocalypse, robots and humans coexisting, you know, rogue special forces, agent has to go in for one last mission kind of thing. Like, it's definitely playing on sci-fi tropes very intentionally, but you know, the goal is to just take you on a ride, like take you on a visual journey, a spiritual journey, immerse you in a world, in a world you haven't seen before, and hopefully make you feel something by the end. So yeah, that's how I would pitch it.
I left the theater feeling all kinds of ways, not just from the fantastic visuals, but the story touched me internally. Like, I felt some sort of post 9/11 trauma after watching the film, which is kind of, I was surprised. I didn't know that going into it. So I like to kind of cold watch films. I knew just enough about the film before seeing it to be really excited, but I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. I like to see movies that way. So.
Oh, fantastic. That is a great way to see it. I watch everything. I watch all trailers, clips, all of it. Like, I can't stay away from it. But I do have a friend who goes to the movies, and as soon as the trailers start, the headphones come out.
Wow.
And he's down on his phone, and he's like, I'm not watching. I'm not looking at any trailer. I'm not ingesting anything that could affect, like, my initial thought going into a film. And I think that's cool. But
I kind of like that.
too much work. Too much work for me.
Definitely.
I'm just gonna watch the trailer. It's fine. But yeah, it's a cool movie. It's an interesting movie. It's if you like sci-fi, if you like Alien, Blade Runner, original Star Wars, there's a little bit of Apocalypse Now in there. It's a little bit of E.T. It's a little bit of Baraka, the documentary.
Yeah.
And it's all kind of just mixed up together to create something hopefully new and exciting and yeah. Check it out.
I was fortunate enough to see a Blade Runner director's cut screening about a week before.
Oh my God.
At the Art Center College of Design, and Stephen Poster, who was the second unit cinematographer on that, was in the audience. talking about the film before the film.
Wow.
And so to be able to kind of bookend this film with watching the original Blade Runner, after I left the theater, I've seen that film many times, but after leaving that theater, the Amundsen Auditorium at Art Center, I was reminded that what we do in cinematography is really art, and that they were really going for it as artists making that film.
Yes.
And then sometimes there's sort of the feeling of like, is it possible to get too high on your own supply being an artist? So like, if for those of you who don't know, Oren was also part of Cinematography Salon Podcast Season 1.
That's
so
right.
if you haven't watched that, I mean, or listened to, I listened to that all the way through. It's fantastic. It leaves me feeling inspired, and I sort of see it as like a stoic touchstone for cinematography.
Oh.
So that's like my takeaway from
Yeah.
Cinematography Salon Podcast Season 1. But after leaving the Blade Runner screening, I was like, I don't know if I could ever make a film this good, but also I don't know if I want to.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you go, well, is that just too much? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe stuff like that just needs to like exist out there, you know?
For sure.
Yeah, first Blade Runner, a huge influence for sure, and in many ways on this film. And I think, yeah, it's just like, for a cinematographer, I mean, what other movie is there really? It's like the touchstone, because it's pure vibe. Like, the plot of the original Blade Runner is nonsensical and it's and irrelevant. You know, it's like that movie is just a pure vibe. And it's like, it's the reason the theatrical cut exists, because the studio is like, nobody understands what's going on. We have to add all this voiceover and all this nonsense to explain the plot. And what they missed at the time, which of course was corrected later by the director's cut, is like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Cinema is immersion, and it's like taking you on a journey, on an emotional journey and a spiritual journey through visuals, through audio. And through world building, and yeah, that's what we tried to do. You know, you can't touch Blade Runner. Like, we're not there, but we're definitely
I'd say it
reaching. We're
exists.
reaching towards it.
You know, to your point, I think it really does exist on its own, and like
Yeah.
in many ways, there's parallels between these two universes of these two films.
Yes.
But they can exist on equal but completely separate planes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, to that point, I would be curious to hear about your journey into filmmaking. How did you first get interested in making films?
Yeah.
And then what were some of the films that inspired you as a filmmaker?
Yeah. Well, I, you know, it's like that line in Goodfellas. Like, for as long as I've ever known, I've always loved movies, and it's true. Like, I have like formative memories in my head from before I have memories of Yoda in the hut in Empire Strikes Back, and I was a big dinosaur kid, so when Jurassic Park came out, that was like earth-shattering. You're like, oh my god, this just transports you to a world where dinosaurs are real, and like, what better fantasy for a 5-year-old, you know, to just like fully immerse in that. So yeah, it was always just a love of movies, and then I was also an artist. Like, I was a little artist kid. I was drawing all the time. Like, anytime, 4 years old, 5 years old, you'd find me in the corner somewhere drawing. Like, go out to a restaurant with the family. They're all talking about adult stuff. Who knows what, Gulf War or whatever was going on in the 90s. And then I'm in the corner drawing, or sketching or whatever. And I picked up photography eventually, and I went to like an arts middle school. So we were doing like sculpting and traditional painting and art history and all sorts of stuff.
That sounds amazing.
It was. I appreciate it even more in hindsight, thinking back, like, oh my god, having a foundation in art history actually really helpful for cinematography, like really, really useful, because painters were the original cinematographers.
I love coming back to art history myself.
Yeah, painters were the original cinematographers. They were the students of light and the students of composition, and the combination of those two things, which is what cinematography is. And it's like, it's all in painting, especially post-Renaissance. Like, once realism started seeping into painting and Impressionism, done, sold. Dutch masters, you know, Raphaelites, Golden, all that stuff.
And
Anyway.
it's interesting, to your point, we don't always acknowledge this in schools these days, but technology was actually a foundational part of that Renaissance development, wouldn't you say? Like in terms of the tools that they were using, whether it was a camera obscura,
Yeah.
or
Yeah,
some,
yeah. No, it was Vermeer. There's a great documentary about Vermeer, where basically the theory about Vermeer, I love that we're talking about art history now. The theory about Vermeer is that Vermeer's paintings were so light accurate, and they were accurate down to like reflections and optical aberrations that the human eye doesn't see. It's optical aberrations that you only get from a lens. So, and this is in the 1700s. So there's a theory that he actually painted with a camera obscura. And it was never proven by history, but basically this guy made a documentary where he was like, I have no skill in painting, but I'm going to set up a camera obscura and I'm going to like recreate Vermeer's art studio, and then see if I can paint a Vermeer, basically. And he drew out a grid, and he projected with a camera obscura an image that he kind of recreated a Vermeer painting, and then he just went grid by grid and painted exactly what he saw. And then I kind of don't want to spoil it because it's like really exhilarating to watch in the movie, but basically he like proves it essentially that, you know, there's aberrations and stuff in those paintings that you wouldn't get from the human eye. And there's all this other historical evidence that Vermeer couldn't paint. Like he actually did not have talent, at least not in terms of like free painting.
what we think of.
Well,
you know,
totally. I mean, he had
right.
exactly like but this was exactly the point, is he actually had this other ability to like leverage technology and understand how it works. Yeah, I mean insulting Vermeer's talent.
No, but
you know what I mean? Like he was not
like
he was not a
the way that-
classically trained painter in that like he could just sit in front of a subject and copy by eye, which is what painting was before the invention of photography and cameras and stuff like that. So anyway, long tangent, but that's why I got into movies. Well, it was basically the nexus. It was like cinematography was the meeting point between art, physical art, visual art, and movies. And it was like the combination of both my interests as a kid. So it was sort of the natural thing to like pursue. You know?
So you could say we went from Nexus 6 to Nexus 7.
Totally.
Just to bring it all back.
Let's bring it all back to it.
But we're going to tag that documentary in the comments below. So be on
Yeah.
the lookout for that Vermeer documentary.
Yeah.
And actually there were some people who started making the same camera obscura tool as like a Kickstarter that would empower you to kind of start trying your hand at,
So cool.
at using these tools
Super cool.
to learn that style of art.
I love that. I love that so much. But
So let's get back more into Oren
Yes.
and the creator.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, it's just sort of the genesis of human creation and, you know, being more than human, right? I think
Yeah.
that's what we all seek, is some form of immortality in a way. And I think that's sort of a meta theme that runs throughout art, throughout this film, and throughout some of our pursuits, you know, being more than what we started as.
yeah,
And to me, that's a really exciting thing.
Yeah.
And interesting to dig into, right?
I love that. I love that. I mean, it's funny. The movie has, I think, a lot of spiritual questions that it asks, and a lot of it is in that lineage of art history, but also of science fiction. You know, like a lot of the themes in the movie are going back to Asimov, like
Right.
using robots as a metaphor for human consciousness and like what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to be a person, and what does it mean to live in this world, and what makes us human. So like all of those things were great, but also it was just such a fun exercise in filmmaking. So it was really like this really cool concepts and interesting science fiction, but also like it was just a feast for filmmaking. And as somebody who loved films and still loves films and filmmaking and the filmmaking process and like getting into that, you know, from that love of movies and then art, like started watching a lot of DVD extras. There were the Lord of the Rings box sets with all the special features. Like that was the real awakening of like, oh my God, filmmaking is like a thing that you can do and you can pursue. And there's a whole segment about cinematography on those discs that was kind of an awakening. So yeah, like the process and the experience of making a film on this one especially was also like really important, as much as the finished film. And in some ways, because of the unique way we made it, we didn't really know what the finished film was going to be, which was also part of the journey.
That sounds kind of non-traditional in
Yes.
a way, right?
Yes, everything about this was non-traditional. I mean, it's hard to even know where to begin, but
Yeah.
it was like,
Well, let's get into it.
Yeah.
So, how'd you first get involved in this?
Yeah.
My understanding is, obviously there were two cinematographers on the project, you and Greg Fraser,
Yeah.
as well as Gareth Edwards, who is, I think, pretty well known to be a very hands-on director.
He was.
So, how do you get involved in that, and how do you kind of approach that new workflow?
Yeah,
Walk us through the phone call. I mean, that must have been exciting to get that first phone call, right?
It was. Well, Greg has been sort of a mentor figure for a while for me for a few years, and I've been very fortunate to meet him and be able to work with him, and over the years, like, develop that relationship. So every once in a while he'll call me, and every time you get a call from Greg, you're like, oh, this is going to be something interesting and strange and curious, and that reflects the past projects that we did. Nothing at this scale or at this level of collaboration, but this was started out as just another one of those calls. It's like I was on set, I was shooting another movie. It was like a small indie film in New York, and then you get a call from Greg, and you're like, oh, okay, this I wonder what it is this time. Like, this will be interesting. And then he pitches me this project. He's like, it's going to be guerrilla style. You're going to be shooting in the jungles of Thailand with almost no crew, and you're just going to be driving around with Gareth, and he's going to get out of a van and shoot some scenes, and it's going to be like Monsters, his first movie, like just totally scrappy and improvised, and then you're going to make a whole movie that way for like 4 months. And I can't go because I was, he was going to go, and then the dates shifted because of COVID and all sorts of stuff, and he had to prep this desert movie. I don't remember what it's called, but something or other. I don't know. You'll see it next year, I think. But so he couldn't be on set. So I came on, and at first it was definitely, I was like, I don't know what this is. He doesn't know what it is. Like, we're still figuring it out. But
had you met Gareth Edwards before that?
No.
He is such a sweet man. That's
he
what
is.
I love Gareth Edwards so much.
Gareth is incredible. So that was the next step, was meeting Gareth, and all three of us hopped on a Zoom, and then we talked for hours. And it was basically just Gareth and Greg catching me up on like 4 years of their conversations about this movie and about filmmaking in general, and big budget filmmaking. Obviously, they did Rogue One, and had, on the one hand, a very amazing experience, and that film has only yielded dividends as time has gone on. Like, people, I think, especially now, look back on it as like, maybe the pinnacle achievement of the Disney Star Wars era, which I think is a correct opinion. I may be biased, but at this point. But there are also a lot of like problems with filmmaking at that level. There's a lot of bloat. There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of inefficiency, and there's moments Gareth would always describe. He's like, okay, when you're shooting a big action scene and there's 100 stunt performers and extras and cranes and explosions and stuff like that, I understand why you need all these people. But like, when we're shooting a scene between two people in a hut in Iceland, and it's just like this very intimate dialogue scene, why do I need 500 people standing outside doing absolutely nothing? They're all just sitting by a truck, and why is the truck even here? We're not using anything on the truck. It's the scene between two people. And so Gareth is just constantly questioning that stuff. Like, he's always like, but why do we do it that way? Why do we do it that way? And then the answer is always like, well, that's just how you do it. So that's why we do it that way. And I think with this film, he really wanted to, like, he's the most sweet, unassuming, like, quiet man, but inside he's like, he has this rebellious spirit where it's constantly like, why do we, he's just questioning everything in the best way possible, and it's just, you just listen to him and you're just like, this is amazing, like, hearing a filmmaker talk this way, and he's so excited about it, and excited about trying new things, and excited about shifting paradigms, and like, so I was just soaking it all in on that call, and just nodding, like, basically.
Like, first principles thinking, right? Like,
yes.
Go back to the first principle, like, why?
Yes.
Ask why. Ask why 5 times.
Yes.
And then you'll get to the root cause, and then
Yes,
maybe you can
100%.
make an effect. That's so cool.
So that was it on that Zoom call. I was basically just listening and nodding, and I think that's why I got the job, because I was into it. I was like, yeah, this sounds cool. Like, this sounds amazing. I love that you're questioning all this stuff, and I was just game for it, and I think a lot of people wouldn't be, and I think that's what makes Greg and Gareth's relationship work is because, like, Greg's talked about this. When he interviewed for Rogue One, he was like, I don't know if I want to do this, because he had also come off of a few other big budget films that he, had a mixed experience on for all of these reasons. And then he says that when he sat down with Gareth, he was like, before you say anything, I just want to say I'm skeptical, and like, I'm not really sure about doing another big budget film because of this, and this. And then Gareth was like, but I was about to say the same thing. Like, I only want to make this movie if we can do it in this different way, and if we can kind of question and buck the, pressures of the machinery in order to do something a little bit different. And then they were like, great, let's do it. And that's what brought them together, is that thought process initially, like that instinct. And then this movie was just that, but like, can we do it for the whole movie and not just certain portions, which is sort of what happened on Rogue One. Because a lot of it was traditional stage builds, but they also did a lot of location work on that film, and they did travel smaller shooting units to the Maldives and Iceland and all these places, and so they did get that. They got that spirit in a lot of the movie, but the next step of that was like, can we do it? Can we do that? Can we do a whole movie that way? And that was the creator, basically.
Fantastic.
Yes.
I mean, so you could say it was prototyped in a way.
Very much so.
With Rogue One.
100%. They were definitely. It's definitely the evolution of ideas and concepts about like filmmaking approach that they had started on Rogue, for sure.
So with that new approach, I caught your talk at the Warehouse Workshop recently, and you mentioned that your workflow tends to be very fast. You're not worried about every last detail.
Yes.
You're worried about getting a good shot and moving on.
Yes.
Is that approach something you were already working with? Did that help you on this project? How did that change as you were filming such a large-scale project?
Yeah, that was already how I thought about lighting and filmmaking in general. It's like 90%, something being 90% good is probably better than something being 100% good, because that little gap of imperfection makes something feel authentic. And actually, like, as part of the filmmaking process, like going back to process, that part of the filmmaking process is like, that imbues something with an energy, like a tone and a feeling that if you overly perfect it, then you're making a commercial. And that's fine. Commercials are there to be tweaked to within an inch of their life and get every image to 100%, and like have the perfect beauty light and the perfect edge and the perfect sculpt and the perfect frame, because you're selling a product. You're not necessarily, you're not trying to take somebody on an emotional journey necessarily. Sometimes you are in a commercial, sometimes, but a lot of times, you're just trying to make something look as good as it can. And so that's a different discipline. It's a different mindset. But I think storytelling is about imperfection, and it's about reality is imperfect. And so I've just always felt like embracing that was important. And the process of filmmaking is already so artificial. Like, there's something so fake about filmmaking and false about filmmaking. And actors are there, and they're in makeup, and they're doing lines, and, well, not doing lines, they're saying lines. Maybe some of them are doing lines. We don't know. But, and everything takes time, and all of that time just makes things feel false, because the reality of a scene, of like a story, needs to feel spontaneous and lived in, and like you're kind of seeing it for the first time. So, I mean, I kind of think I think about cinematography the same way. And it's a fine line, because you can also do too little, and then something can just look sloppy or like just unaesthetic. But to me, it's like, it's just finding that balance. It's like, you want something to be aesthetic, but you also want it to be imperfect. And it goes back to painting, honestly. Like, Impressionism is kind of the perfect example of this. It's like, it's reality, it's beautiful, it's not flat, it's not sloppy, there's beauty, but it's imperfect, and it's capturing the imperfections of reality, and that's what makes it beautiful. So I think about cinematography that way a lot. Like, especially in narrative.
There's something lively in that, in taking the risk, right?
Yeah.
I think cinematography can be empowered by being dangerous in a way. You have risk at your fingertips, and you have to take that risk and let it go, right?
Yeah, but I think all filmmaking has to have a little bit of that, like a little bit of that risky kind of dangerous nature to it. Because if it's safe, then what's interesting about that? You know, like what you know, and there's plenty of movies and plenty of TV shows out there that are safe and they're perfectly fine, but that's not what excites me as a filmmaker. So that's not what I do basically. But yeah, the process of it is part of it, is like moving quickly and keeping things simple so that you can spend as much time as possible shooting, and as much time as possible letting actors like live a scene. That's really the important part for me. It's like no lighting setup should take hours. It's just that it's not, you know, and if you do need hours, like if there's a lighting setup that takes hours, then it should not be happening on set time. And so you either have to plan a little bit better so that, you know, and you have a pre-light crew or whatever, however you can approach it, to make sure that if you do need to do some heavy lifting, it can be done in advance. But like on the day, the process of being on set with director, actors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, can't be like that. Like it can't be like, oh, I'm just gonna tweak this light a little bit and I'm gonna move this a little bit over there. It's like, it just kills the energy of filmmaking, which is like propulsive and immediate and yeah, at least for me. So this was the perfect project. And I think maybe they kind of saw that as well. Like that's how Greg and Gareth think about it, and that's how I thought about it.
Definitely. With that approach in mind, The Creator is such a VFX heavy movie. It's a very, to me, it feels like the movie is very much about the scale of everything, right? It's a huge movie. How does that change your approach? Do you have to pay more attention? Is it more previs stuff? Yeah.
Well, what Gareth did with this movie that's really innovative is it didn't change the approach. The VFX were designed, and this was all the plan, this is how the film was conceived, is that the visual effects are going to be designed to the footage that we shot and not pre-designed at all. So we did have some concept art and we had some imagery to at least sort of get an idea of like what this world could look like in our heads. But it was not prescriptive. Like it was not like, we're shooting, you know, this scene is going to look like this. So you need to capture this, and this is what the foreground needs to look like, and you need to put a big green screen in the back, and this is what we're going to add, so you need a frame for that. Like, it was not like that. We shot the film as if everybody in front of the camera was the characters that they are, and as if each of our locations was the location. And then all the visual effects were going to be painted on in post, and they were going to be designed to the shots. So they edited the whole movie without visual effects.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
And then designed specific visual effects, images, ships, buildings, etc., to each frame. And that process was happening like all throughout the shoot. So like our dailies, you know, we would take stills from the dailies, and every day the production designer, James Klein, would get sent stills, and he would already start working on them. Like he would start doing paint overs in Photoshop, like very, very simple, just painting over a frame, and then he would send them to us. And so you would see this frame that we just shot the other day, and then suddenly there's like this very rough drawing of a future cityscape in the background. And you're like, cool, that's awesome. I see where this is going. Like, but we didn't really see the end results until the VFX shots started coming in. Like there was a whole part of the process with Greg and Gareth, with Gareth and James, the production designer, and ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, that was happening. Like they did a lot more work, I think, in post than you typically do, because they were also doing a lot of design work as well as visual effects work. So that was the unique approach. But as a result, on set, visual effects did not lead us at all. And that was, I think, the key, like, to what made this a little bit different.
Yeah, I'm actually really impressed to hear that, because the visual effects in The Creator are unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like some of the best I've seen in a while.
Yeah.
And it's very impressive to hear that was
but that's why they're good.
Yeah, it feels very natural.
That's the thing, is that they are more so than usual, like completely built on and based on what we did on set. So they have no choice but to like match our lighting, match our rough and tumble shooting style, match our environment, and that's what makes them look more realistic. So like it makes visual effects look better and more believable and lived in, and like at one with the film. It saves costs, it saves time on set, and it just like gives you all this freedom. It's like it's just a win-win. It's a win-win-win-win situation. But it requires somebody like Gareth to have that kind of vision, to like commit to that and to take that risk, because it's risky. It's risky. And it was risky for the studio. Like, I have to give credit to New Regency, because the whole time they were like, you want to make the movie like this way? Okay. And they trusted him. And they trusted Gareth the whole time, and let us make the movie in this crazy way without, previs, without all this stuff that you typically have at this budget level. That all that stuff's there for insurance. It's just like an insurance policy. We didn't have it. So we just had to go out and like make this movie, and we were going to get what we were going to get.
I think that's like the key story, is it's in a way a story of trust, right? Like,
yes,
you trusted that this is going to be a project you'd like to be a part of from that phone call. Like, you get a phone call and it says Greg Fraser on your phone, you go, I better answer this call.
Yeah, and I'm going to trust it. Like, that's enough for me to trust it. Is like, oh, Greg is involved in this? Okay.
And the relationship with Gareth and Greg as well, like the way that they built that relationship,
totally,
shows him inherent trust.
Exactly.
So that's really cool.
Yeah.
And very inspiring.
It was. The whole movie was like one 2-year perpetual trust fall. And we were just all like, okay, here we go. And, let's see what happens.
Awesome. So getting into how the movie was shot on a more technical level.
Yes.
Notoriously shot on an FX3.
The rumors are true.
I know, and that was very exciting to me personally.
Yeah.
My personal camera is an A7S3, which
Yes.
is same camera,
Same
different
camera.
body.
Yeah.
So I was very, shocked, inspired, something like that, by the kinds of images that you guys were getting out of this tiny, tiny little camera, which we actually have right here. This
Here it is.
The exact Mercury 42 millimeter that was used on set.
It is. I recognize it. The silver coating, no paint. Yep, this is the one.
You can tell it's a very early prototype because none of the other ones look like that.
Yeah, exactly. I looked as soon as I walked into the room, I saw it and I was like, oh, that looks familiar. I've seen that lens before.
It's like a best car material.
It is, yeah. It looks really cool. But yeah, and we didn't even have this. This is too bulky for us. We didn't have this. No top handle.
Yeah, you don't need that. That's for audio, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
That's like the
audio.
preamp.
So how did you usually have it built?
Well, the main rig, the advantage of shooting on this camera is there were many, but one advantage is we had 10 of them. Production bought the cameras, so we're not dealing with rental houses, we're not dealing with anything. We bought the cameras, so we had 10 camera bodies.
So if something gets wet or, a camera body goes down for some reason, it's not going to slow down production, and it's not going to upset anyone.
Yes, but there was another important reason that we had 10 bodies was that we were able to basically pre-build different configurations for filming. So, and we had them all built at the same time, and they were always ready. So Gareth could basically shoot with whatever he wanted. It's like so the main rig was a gimbal. The camera was built on a Ronin RS2, and Gareth had this idea early on from his scouts, like those gimbals are designed to be held like this, like a lollipop, but it's a very uncomfortable way to operate. Mm-hmm. And so Gareth found that actually if you turn it on its side and you kind of tuck the handle under your arm, you can hold it like this, and then you can operate it for a lot longer. And the camera's basically tilted up technically, like on the axis of the gimbal, because the gimbal, which usually sits this way, is actually sitting 90 degrees like that. And so what we did was we built a whole rig around that shape. So the gimbal was attached to an L bracket that had a shoulder pad on it, battery plate on the back, and handles on the front. So you could basically shoulder this whole thing. You could hold it up here, and the camera's on the gimbal. So it's completely smooth. You can pan, you can tilt, you can do a push in, you can dolly, and all these moves are smooth, but you're just holding it on a handheld gimbal.
So it's almost like an extension of your body in a way.
Exactly.
It becomes an add-on to your...
Exactly. It's basically what it is we Frankenstein jury-rigged a Ronin 4D before that camera existed, which is basically that. It's like a camera body with a kind of separate lens mount on a little gimbal that's built into it. We kind of made our own version of that because that didn't exist at the time. And also, I don't know if we would have shot on it for other reasons, but yeah, so that was basically it. And we set it up so that you could shoot it here. You could then like, we had a top handle on it, so you could shoot it down here. You could like shoot it low. It was so flexible. And so that was the main rig, and you could get almost every shot on that. And you could only do it with this like tiny lightweight camera and a lightweight lens, which was a huge factor as well. Like this whole thing weighs what, 2 pounds maybe?
Right
and
around there.
I think the max on the RS2 is something around that. It's like 3 pounds or something, maybe 4. I don't know. But anyway, so that was the idea. And then we basically had other gimbals, and they were all pre-built on other tools. So we had one that was on a Kessler slider, a shuttle dolly, and it was either on a pedestal on that dolly, or we had like a mini jib, very small mini jib from Grip Factory Munich. It's called the GF mini jib. Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, it's like 2 feet long, very small. But yeah, that sat on the dolly, so we could do little crane shots and push-ins and stuff like that. And then we had a third camera body that was pre-built on a crane, also on a Ronin, underslung. And then we had a fourth one on a heavy lift drone, DJI drone. And so at any point we could be like, all right, Garrett's going to start shooting with the gimbal, and he's going to start shooting and start finding shots and start getting stuff. But then he's already being like, okay, we'll do a crane shot to start the scene. So like, let's set that up over here while I'm filming. And it takes 5 minutes to set that up because it's a lightweight, portable scissor crane. And then we shoot the crane shot. And then while we're shooting the crane shot, it's like, all right, send up the drone. Start that going. And that's how we shot. It was just, we would not stop filming. Like, it was just film as much as you can. And yeah, the goal was just it was just searching for those moments of like authenticity and spontaneity in front of the camera. And that's what this allowed. Like, that's what having something this small just allows you to do. I mean, we had another camera that wasn't in any rigging at all. It wasn't on a gimbal. It looked exactly like this, but without the top handle. It was just the camera body. It had a little side handle that had like a focus motor and a Ninja recorder on the top, because we always recorded to the Atomos Ninja recorder. So that camera you could just pick up, like at any point. You see some, I don't know, kids playing in the background and the sun's setting and there's like this beautiful moment. It would just be like, oh, just grab it and like go get that shot real quick. And it's like, you can't do that with a huge camera, tripods, block batteries, all the stuff we usually use. It just like, it's great gear, but it can slow you down if you're making a movie the way we did, on location, kind of documentary style. Like, we wanted that flexibility. And
sometimes you can find magic, right? When you're just able to be free,
yeah, you
can discover magic in the world around you.
The whole film was set up to, in the search of that magic. Like, that was the whole idea. And then hopefully those are the moments that make it into the movie. You hope, and you hope while you're filming that Garrett's going to cut out all the crap and all the stuff that doesn't work.
I think he did.
He did, but it's because he has good taste, and we, even he would be on set saying that, like, oh well, we're not going to use this bit, which is good. That's what you want to hear from a director, but not always the case, because a lot of times there's other factors that go into that decision making. But yeah, we could always trust that he's not going to put some sloppy lighting or camera move in the film, and there's a lot of it on the cutting room floor, because that's part of this process. Is like, part of that exploration is like, a lot of it doesn't work, and that's okay, because it just needs to work once.
You don't have to tell us, but I almost feel like after watching the film that there could almost be a sequel from this film that might have already been filmed.
Yeah.
From the footage, and that like there's another piece of this story that might appear. Like, maybe that's just my imagination.
It wouldn't be a sequel, but what it would be is, did you ever watch when they put Anchorman out on DVD? They basically did that. They had enough material that got cut from that movie that they actually released a different movie that was made up of the subplots that got cut from the main film.
I haven't seen that, but it sounds like it's worth revisiting this weekend.
Yeah, and alternate takes and stuff like that, because there was so much in that movie that they improvised and got cut. So you could 100% release a version of this movie that is feature length of interesting stuff that we filmed, that is not in the movie.
Wow.
For sure. Will they do that? Probably not. But they could, and we can start the grassroots campaign right here and right now.
We could dream about it, right?
Write 20th century students. No, please don't write them. Actually, I might get in trouble. So don't.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. Maybe let's keep that in the back pocket. I'm hoping at the very least for deleted scenes, like, because there's some really great stuff. But yeah, that was part of the process of discovering the film. Was like a lot of it ended up on the cutting room floor, and that's okay. That's part of it. That's part of how it goes. Like sometimes you shoot something and it doesn't work, and you're like, okay, well.
I almost want to know more about the characters. That was my takeaway. Is like I want to go back into this world. Yeah. So I think maybe it's always good to want more. But I think so. That's why I left the theater going like, take me back.
I think that ultimately, as satisfying as that would be to kind of go back and see more of the world, I do think that's part of that's like a good thing in the movie. Mm-hmm. It's like if it leaves you wanting a little bit more at the end, that is a good thing. And at the very least, you can always revisit this world, the one that is in the finished film. Mm-hmm. And it does reward repeat viewings for sure.
That was something I really liked about this movie. Is I was walking out of the theater thinking they could have milked a trilogy out of that, and I'm so glad they didn't, because I think it works so much better when it's kind of compacted like that. It's a cohesive story all in one go.
Yeah,
and
it's lean. It's lean. Yeah, lean is good.
Definitely.
We don't need to. Not everything needs to be an 8-hour miniseries. It's basically, sorry streamers, but yeah, some of that stuff probably make a better movie. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But anyway.
Yeah. So obviously, this prototype 42mm Mercury was used on a significant portion of the film. I'm curious about how that was chosen, when you would use that versus other lenses on the film. What was your approach with this lens?
Well, basically, our main lens on the film was a 75mm Kowa Cine Prominar, 2x anamorphic. So that lens, I think Gareth had already been shooting with for years. Like he bought one, he had it rehoused, PS Technic, and he owns that lens. And he was shooting a lot of the test footage on it. I think he took that movie on his. He basically shot like a little proof of concept in, I think it was 2018 or 2019. It was pre-COVID. And that's actually what he used to pitch the film and sell it to the studio. And I hope they released that. I actually saw some clips of it. Dolby did a chat with Gareth and the sound design team, and they got access to some clips from that test reel, because the sound design team, E², they sound designed it, and Industrial Light and Magic did the visual effects on it. So that film is like a 10-minute, that's Baraka, but with robots. Like that one is pure 10 minutes of just documentary footage of Gareth roaming around Southeast Asia with a Nikon DSLR on a gimbal and the Kowa lens, and just shooting like beautiful sunsets and textures, and then ILM added all the visual effects and all the sci-fi on top of it as a proof of concept for like, this is how we're gonna do the movie. But there's no narrative. It's just images and sounds and textures, and it's beautiful. And so I saw that when they sent me the script, and they sent me concept art, and they sent me that film. And the minute you see that film, you're like, I understand what we're doing here. So
I've had the privilege of seeing that, actually.
You've seen it. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so I hope they release it. But I also hope they release the anime that's in the movie. So Alfie watches this anime on TV that's basically like the insurgency fighting Nomad. And that actually they animated a whole thing. I think it's like 5 minutes long.
Oh, wow.
So you only see snippets of it, but I'm also really hoping that they release that. But anyway, tangent. So the 75mm. So that sort of became our hero lens because, I mean, for various reasons. It was lightweight, small, and it's a great focal length. You can get a lot close-ups with it, mediums. Like, it just looks good. Compresses space really nice.
Your horizontal field of view is effectively like around 38mm because of the 2x anamorphic.
That's exactly right. So it's very close to the human eye, which is really the point of that focal length and that lens. It's like Robert Bresson shooting entire movies on a 50mm. It's the same idea. Yeah, so we really stuck with that lens, but the thing is it is a tight focal length, and so sometimes we just needed a wider option to complement it for wide shots or tight quarters. There's a lot of car interiors in the film that we needed something wider to be able to see edge to edge. And we use this a lot in the third act. There's a lot of stuff, I don't want to spoil it, but in the third act and where the characters go. And we did some volume filming, and this lens was very helpful to be able to kind of get wide shots with the camera backed up as far as it would go. Of course, you're limited by the space of the volume. So yeah, there's a lot of this in the third act, and there's a lot of this throughout the film in kind of tighter quarters. But yeah, that was basically it. It was like we just knew that we needed, like, you're going to commit to shooting the whole film on one focal length, but you need a backup, like, just in case. You know, you don't want to completely burn that ship. So yeah, in the search of wider focal length, Greg had been testing this on some shoots earlier in the year, on some commercials. But you should tell the story of because there's a great, like, the Mercuries are really ingrained in the DNA of the film because of Gareth.
Genesis,
it's a great story.
The genesis of the Mercury series lenses, as I told you off camera, is essentially these Mercury series lenses are what I like to call the Gareth Edwards lens.
Yeah.
So we'd been fortunate enough to meet Greg and Gareth at NAB 2017 when we first introduced Atlas Lens Co. And Gareth was talking about this movie that he wants to make, describing all this sort of approach of, very non-traditional sort of run and gun filmmaking, but to make an epic film. And he said, I need a lens that's anamorphic, it needs to be small, it needs to cover full frame. And we were like, well, the Orion Series 32 is pretty small, and it will cover like the 16:9 area out of a FX3, which we didn't know he was going to use at that time. It didn't even exist.
It didn't exist. Yeah, it didn't exist.
We were like, well, this will cover, a 16:9 extraction of a full frame sensor. And he's like, no, it needs to be way smaller than that.
Yeah.
So that kind of set us on the journey of what can Atlas build that would be a full frame coverage lens, ultra light, ultra compact, and in many ways non-traditional, but satisfy all the tropes that we love from the anamorphic films we grew up watching,
Totally.
whether it's Blade Runner or Close Encounters of the Third Kind or, all the Star Wars films.
Yeah.
And so, we were inspired by the mission that Gareth and Greg had set out with to make this film, and that's what led us on the development path, because not only did we know Gareth and Greg would like to use a lens like this, but we realized, hey, this is actually the kind of lens we as filmmakers ourselves would like to use, and we think that other people would also be well suited to use in modern times. And so that's why we designed it with a 1.5 squeeze, because so many sensors are limited to a 16:9 recording mode.
Yeah.
And with a 1.5 squeeze, you get a traditional 2.66 to 1 delivery.
2.66 out of it. Yep.
But if you're using something like a 3:2 aspect ratio sensor, like on an Alexa Mini LF, or a 4:3 sensor on a Venice, for instance, or the 3:2 aspect of the Venice, you can easily get a 2:1 for Univisium Netflix style 2:1 delivery. And so having that 1.5 squeeze in a much smaller lens size with full frame coverage opens up a lot of new possibilities for not only on-set approaches, but also for delivery formats.
Yeah.
So, so much of what we do as filmmakers is not only defined by the story, but also often the venue at which we're going to be showing it. And so that's something that kind of has awakened in my mind and my eyes here at Atlas, is as new venues open for viewing, whether it's in an IMAX where you're surrounded by the film, or whether you're putting on something like an Apple Vision Pro headset, but you want to have a traditional film viewing style experience, but just immersive on your head. A lot of options there.
Yeah,
so,
if you're into that kind of thing.
If you're into that sort of thing.
Which some people will be. But yeah, exactly. And I mean, ultimately for us, like, what it comes down to, I mean, as a DP, there's some DPs that are quite technical, and they look at, lens performance and accuracy and sharpness and and my truth is that I don't care about any of that stuff. Like, what I care about is, what does a lens look like? Like, what do the optics do to the image? And this movie was inspired visually by all the films that you mentioned, and the ones that I mentioned earlier, Alien, and all of these movies were shot on 70s anamorphic lenses. And so that aesthetic, the bokeh, the edge distortion, the softness on the top and bottom, the slight vignetting, the way they render depth, the the roundness of them as opposed to, this or rectilinear. It's like there's that nice roundness to it. That's what we like optically, visually. It's about characteristics, like those characteristics. And this had it. This had those characteristics, and we were matching it with an actual 1970s anamorphic lens. So, it just had to be something that gave us something similar, lightweight, tiny. It was just the lens for the job. It was great.
I love to hear that. It makes me
It
makes me feel very warm.
No, it was it. And then now of course you expanded the set, and we've looked at all the other focal lengths. I love all of them, but it all started with the 42.
And we call this the desert island lens because if you had to go to a desert island,
yes,
and you could only take one lens, for us this was maybe the lens.
Right.
Although I think the Kowa is also a great choice, but we're just not going to make an exact Kowa replica.
No,
those
you wouldn't.
exist. They're great.
If I took one Mercury to a desert island, it would be the 72.
That's a great choice.
It would be the 72. It's just I like the tighter focal length. The wide. Sometimes you don't want a wide, especially when you're here. I find when you're here, you don't want a wide lens. That's just me. It's obviously a lot of people do like that, but I don't know, the wide angle lens like this close, it's just not my thing. But 72, perfect focal length.
Could you walk us through some of your approach when choosing lenses for other projects? Like how do you decide between a spherical lens or an anamorphic lens for a project? And then it sounds like one of the things that helps define your decision is how does this lens make me feel?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, a big question is like, what is the vibe of the project, right? So on this one, for example, I mean, it was just very clear that the vibe was the 1970s, 1980s sci-fi film. So anamorphic is, you almost don't even have to say it out loud. It's so inherently obvious. But that sort of becomes the same question I ask on every project is like, what is the vibe of this film? And because I think in movie language, like, it's often, what is the vibe of the films that I think we're channeling with whatever we're making. So usually it's like based on the reference images. Like a lot of times if we can't quite make a decision, the director and I will look through some of the, like a bunch of the reference images, and then we'll look and we'll see like, what, all of these are spherical. Like all of our references are spherical, and they're all like 35 mil spherical, 35 mil focal length. So I think maybe that's our lens, like that's our hero lens. You test, you always want to test everything. But that's usually what ends up driving it. It's like, what movies does this remind me of, and what is the vibe that we're kind of going for? That's pretty much it. Yeah.
I like to show lenses that way. I mean, every Wednesday we have Wednesday Lens Day here, where not only do we show all the Atlas lenses, but you're actually welcome to bring in any of your own vintage lenses. Mm-hmm. We also have the Atlas Anamorphic Lens History Museum, so I'll have to show you that after the stream. But we have a tremendous collection of vintage anamorphic lenses, running the gamut from Bosch and Lohm CinemaScope Baltars, which were the first American anamorphic lenses.
I've never seen
some of the French anamorphic lenses, like the Aliscope. So I think you're going to be like a kid in a candy store.
Very
after
cool.
this.
I can't wait. Sorry, everybody.
But we love it when people bring in their own lenses. We can, we have huge screens that we like to look at the lenses live and let people interact with them with lighting here.
Yeah.
We have a projector room, which is not as fun as putting the lenses on a camera, but for those who are very into the metrology and metrics of a lens, that's a great option. But I think sort of the human metrology is like, how does it render a human face at distances that you like to be shooting at? To me, that's my favorite way to pick a lens.
Ultimately, that's all that matters to me. Mm-hmm. I don't really look at at the projector.
Yeah,
I'm
results oriented.
Let the ACs look at the projector. If you need to match a lens set, or whatever, like you're shooting on two sets, and you want to make sure that they're close, like sure, but that's for the scientists to figure out. We're the artists. We're not dealing with that stuff. I'm just like, just give me a paintbrush and give me a thing, and we'll paint with whatever we have. Like that's sort of my approach. But anyway.
So speaking of what you have, shooting with the FX3,
yes.
The Mercury and the Kowa are both relatively fast lenses.
Yeah.
And a lot of the shots in the Creator are either at night or in relatively natural lighting conditions. So I'm curious, what was your approach to lighting at night? How does the FX3 play into that? How did the lenses contribute to that?
We shot all the lenses wide open, the whole movie. And the thing that the FX3 unlocked us for night shooting was the 12,800 ISO. So it just opened up this whole other world of lighting that you couldn't really expect. I mean, we had a very lean lighting package as well. We used mainly aperture lights, Astera, other kind of like low wattage, battery powered RGB LEDs, and that was our lighting package. So, and even for our big night exteriors.
What was your gaffer's name?
Pitai.
Pitai.
Yeah.
So
shout out to
right?
Pitai. Now Pitai crushed it, and Pitai is also a DP. Based out of Thailand, and actually our whole electric team were DPs. He kind of brought together like the Thai DP Avengers for our electric team. Like all of them are great DPs. They're all relatively young, but like it was just the perfect like mindset that it's like you want DPs on this team because they're the kind of people who would sort of be gung-ho about this approach and not be like a traditional electric, like, well, that's not the right way to do this, and da-da-da.
That's my favorite on-set joke is like, how do you tell the difference between an electrician and a grip? All the electricians are DPs.
Yeah.
Coming from a former local 728 electrician myself.
Yeah, shout out to 728. But yeah, so the lighting. So we were able to light night exteriors with aperture 1200D, like in a lift. And it can light up a whole field at 12,800 ISO. Actually, we would have to dim them down. They were too bright.
The key is the diffusion, though, right? It's I heard that the key diffusion used in the film was a fertilizer bag.
Yes, the fertilizer bag. It's true. Listen,
light modifiers.
We used whatever we had.
I love that. We've all been there. I mean, who hasn't taken like a solo cup and put it over a fixture in a practical?
Oh, 1,000%.
Right?
Pitai is posting on his Instagram some great BTS videos of some of the other kind of scrappy filmmaking. There's a lot of electrics holding lights physically and moving them. It was very creative. There's a lot of lights in the film. Like there's a lot of MCs on frame, and Astera tubes, and we also had a Roscoe DMG dash.
Oh, those are cool.
So those were on camera, and yeah, like that was part of the lighting approach too. Was lighting a space. And integrating lights into it and just saying like, screw it, people are going to see it. We'll have to dress it up so it doesn't look like a light. Well, I mean, so it doesn't look like a movie light, but it can look like a light source. That's okay. And so that was a big part of the approach too. And also just being able to shoot in blue hour and dusk and all this stuff. I mean, the high ISO was huge for us. The camera can see when you're at that tail end of blue hour, you're shooting. The human eye can't see anymore. It's too dark, but the camera still has an extra 10 minutes of like shooting under those conditions. And a lot of the like deep dusky stuff in the movie is at that time of day. So it's like a very, very special look because it's one that you can't get at ISO 800 on an Alexa. You just can't get it.
We got some viewer questions, and I'm also curious about this as well.
Yes.
The digital noise at that high ISO, were you using any kind of noise reduction, or were you just living with it?
It was on a shot-by-shot basis. We did noise reduce some shots, like if we're on a close-up of a face and there's just really distracting noise, we would noise reduce it. And other times we just leaned into it. The whole movie also had a film grain pass on it, and halation, and also the stuff like film emulation. So a lot of it was like we kind of just liked the noise. Like it already, for whatever reason, Sony does not understand it. Like, because we keep trying to explain it to them, and they're like, no, but it's bad. Like it's wrong. The sensors shouldn't, like, wouldn't you prefer this cleaner sensor? And we're like, no, we like the noise in the FX3, and we can't explain it. There's just something aesthetically nice about that noise. I don't know why, but it just looks like film grain. So. And not all digital noise across all cameras does, but for whatever reason, the noise level at 12,800 on this sensor looked nice to us. So
no, I totally agree.
So we leaned into it.
If you can see it in IMAX, I highly recommend it because that's where you really get a sense of that texture and that noise. And I don't know. Yeah. It was so smooth and natural in a way that you don't usually get from a digital sensor. Yeah.
Well, it's mixed with the film grain, but yeah.
I wasn't taken out of the film one moment by any technical things. I was in it, like, and to me that's the testament. It's like if I'm emotionally in the film, then
Success.
Yes.
I'm gonna send Gareth that clip and just make sure that he hears that.
Yeah,
But, yeah.
I think if I hadn't been told it was shot on an FX3, I don't think anyone would have noticed.
We didn't want to tell anyone, actually. I mean, it just sort of became unavoidable at some point, thanks to a certain someone who spilled the beans early.
Wasn't me.
It was not you. It was Greg. It was Greg. But yeah, he was just on another podcast. It was actually before we even started filming. And then all you internet sleuths somehow like pieced it all together, like, oh, he must have been talking about this movie that he's about to start shooting, and then it just became this unavoidable question, and we tried to avoid it for a long time. We were like, oh, we don't want to. You'll see the movie, but yeah. So in the end, it all came out. But yeah, the goal was like we did not think anybody would notice that it was shot on this camera, and we wanted it to be a surprise. Like, guess what?
Gotcha.
By the way, you'll never guess what we shot this movie on, because like I don't think you can tell, and I don't think the more important thing is I don't think it matters. Like I mean, the choices were made for very specific logistical reasons, ergonomic reasons, technical, but not that was it. Like that was the consideration, and all it took was just one decision of we're just not going to let convention dictate what camera we're going to shoot on. We're just going to consider everything and consider what is actually the best tool for the way Gareth wants to shoot this movie, which is a very unique way to shoot a movie, and this was it. And then you just need to check, like, hey, is this footage good enough? It is. Then great, that's it, problem solved, like end of conversation basically.
In some ways, this is the El Mariachi of 2023. I think this is going to inspire a lot of filmmakers to say, hey, you know what? I could make a film. Yeah. And they will. And I think that's really beautiful because we need inspiration.
Agreed. Amen.
So getting into some more of the viewer questions, how was the conversation with the colorists on the movie? You're talking about some of the film grain stuff. How did that go with this camera and just your goals for the movie? I
mean, it was basically rigorous testing. Photochem and our colorist Dave Cole, who also did the Batman and Dune parts 1 and 2, they were on board on the project before we started filming. So they were on all through our scouts, our test shoots, everything, and that whole process they were also sort of onboarding the project and starting to figure out, like, what is the workflow, what studying the camera, studying the color space, understanding what it can give you, what it gets you, and creating our LUT, like all of it. So it was just having them involved in advance and not just sort of like dumping all this footage on them and being like, here, figure it out. Like, it was all, by the time we started shooting, we, Photochem, Greg, everybody at every point in the pipeline, ILM, post, like everybody knew what the camera was capable of, knew what color information was there, what the footage was going to do, and what it was going to look like. So that was really it. And then, I mean, by that point, once all that stuff's solved by all the nerds in the back at Photochem, who are geniuses, by the way, like the stuff that they figured out to leverage the color system in the camera, the color science in the camera, and create our LUT based on that color science, like very complex stuff that I don't know how they do it. But all I know is that a LUT comes out the other end of that process and it looks amazing, and then you're like, great, cool, good. And it makes the actual grading process very easy, like just sitting in the room with Dave, and then we're just making creative choices at that point, not technical ones.
How did you deal with the rolling shutter on the FX3?
It was an issue. We thankfully, I mean, we didn't really bump into it too much in movement. We just didn't, like, in the film language, I don't know, we just don't like moving the camera that way. Like, there's no whip pans or anything like that where you would see like crazy warping. We did run into it with LEDs. So there were certain non-film LEDs, like practicals and stuff that were on locations, and we used some projectors sometimes, and those just like wouldn't sync with the camera really well, which was very frustrating because there's no way to fix it, and the FX3 doesn't have in between shutter angles like cinema cameras. So
Sony, if you're listening.
Oh,
FX3 Mark II.
Oh, they know.
Okay.
They've heard me talk about that many times, and I'm begging and pleading. But yeah, look, I mean, the camera has limitations, and we worked around them. In this case, thankfully, we live in a day and age with extremely good de-flicker software, and or de-strobing, and anything that Photochem couldn't do with that software. We also had the best visual effects company in the world. So, like, worst case scenario, we knew that, okay, if there was some rolling shutter issue or flicker issue that we could not resolve, they'll fix it. And they did. So that's how we dealt with it, basically, is, shoot on a $4,000 camera and then have the best post house and best visual effects company in the world backing you up. So yeah, grain of salt, I guess. But
it's a good approach.
It will, look, these issues will be fixed eventually, so it's like I'm not even worried about it. But it is a limitation to know about if you choose to go down this road. There's others, by the way. There's other limitations. Can't really do slow-mo very well. You can do 30 frames per second or 60, and it's called S&Q mode. It's not like a cinema camera where you can dial in a frame rate and then play it back in slow-mo. It doesn't work that way. You have to ingest that footage and then do a step down, like retime it to 24. It's a pain in the ass. But again, there's no slow-mo in this movie. That's not part of Gareth's film lexicon. So we didn't have to deal with that limitation, but it is a limitation that exists. So,
speaking of that flicker, how much of the lighting in this movie was practical or driven by practical lights in these scenes?
I mean, we wanted the lighting to always look and feel like it was driven by practicals, even when it was practicals placed by us and a set designed and kind of lit entirely by us. But yeah, I mean, the approach was always to create a world that feels as naturalistic and believable as possible. So we relied and leaned on practicals very heavily. Basically, whenever we would show up to a location, we would assess what practicals were already there, like what could we already use that's here, and then start making decisions like, do we need to add any? Do we need to augment the ones that are here and add some of our own that look like these to sort of spread it? Or, are we at a location and maybe there aren't any practicals, so we need to just add some of our own? Or maybe we need to take some away. Maybe we need to use that lamp but replace the bulb with, we had a couple of kits of B7C, I think they're called, the aperture bulbs. So that we can control them and control the brightness levels. Some of our locations were set builds that we built from scratch, so we would have to add the practicals there. But the approach was very much driven by that. We always wanted the lighting to feel motivated and grounded. So practicals were a big part of that for sure.
Awesome. Here's another viewer question. Rogue One and Monsters both used red cameras. Why didn't you shoot on a Komodo or a Raptor rather than the FX3?
I don't know if that's true.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I think Rogue One used Arri, but
that would make sense.
Most big movies use a mix of different cameras, so
yeah.
I think the question still stands. A Komodo is, an equally small camera, I would say. It's in the same realm.
Yeah.
Why this camera?
Sony color science is just fantastic. Like they just have something figured out that I don't really use red. I can't speak for Greg, but you don't really see a lot of red cameras on his sets either. And it's just it just comes down to a preference. But the Komodo's amazing. Like, that little camera body is really incredible. It would be another great way to make a movie this way. If you're familiar with that tool and you're familiar with the color science and you like the look of it, then yeah, same approach. Just replace the camera body. But we just, I think, gravitated to the Sony color science and the sort of raw recording capabilities of the FX3.
Cool.
Yeah, it ends up being a little bigger with the Komodo, ironically, too. I mean, if you look
Komodo's
at this,
bigger than this for sure.
This is so small. It's
bigger. The Komodo is bigger than this. But yeah, I mean, a perfectly valid and excellent approach to, like, this type of filmmaking.
We're so spoiled in this day and age, right? I mean,
oh my God, we really are. There's so many great choices. I mean, when I came up, the 5D just came out, and that, like, blew our minds. So you're like, oh my God.
I was one of the early adopters of DSLRs for motion work.
Yeah. The 5D 70. I had a T2i because I couldn't afford a 5D.
Yeah.
So 5D was like $2,000, and the T2i was like $800. And to me, it looked the same. And those
it
cameras,
does, the codec's the same.
yeah, those cameras are very limiting now. Like you look back on it and you're like, oh wow, you couldn't do anything with those things. But at the time, it kind of blew the doors open.
In a way, I was just looking at a Rebel T3i the other day. We actually kind of did some fun tests of Atlas lenses with a T3i.
They're actually not that bad, huh?
It actually kind of works.
Does it kind of hold up?
It's its own aesthetic. Like,
I haven't looked at those cameras in a long time, but that would be a fun throwback, actually. A lot of my student projects are on a 7D or a T2i back in the day, but yeah.
And that kind of, in a way, the spirit of that kind of reminds me of the spirit of this. Like,
absolutely.
To be able to work with a small camera, grab and go, I think that's the liberating thing about a video DSLR or a mirrorless camera like this, is the freedom to work how you want to work and develop new ways of working that maybe haven't been done before. So I think that's really exciting. Like, borrow from the shoulders of giants and then create your own way forward. That's the most exciting thing about modern camera technology to me. Just a tool for making our stories.
Well said. I completely agree.
One last question, just to wrap things up here.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for younger filmmakers, cinematographers, on a creative level and on a technical level?
Great question. I think I have two pieces of advice. One is they're both kind of practical, but one of them is, I think it's very important for cinematographers to be students of film. And I don't mean celluloid, I mean filmmaking and movies. Though learning celluloid isn't bad either, but obviously it's a lot more limited these days. Directors talk in movie language. Like, all directors are movie buffs, and they watch everything, and they've seen all the classic films, and they think about their film from a perspective of, what other movies is this like? That's like every director I've ever worked with. They just think about movies.
How does this fit into oeuvre of cinema, right?
Exactly. And also, like, where am I pulling inspirations from? Because, like, how does a director learn how to direct? They, like, watch movies, And so if you as a cinematographer don't speak movie, I would reckon that it would be very hard to communicate with a director. And I think that I see that a lot. There's, like, a lot of DPs that I talk to, and I get it. People have lives, people have other stuff going on, and then they're like, I don't have time to watch movies, I don't have time to, get into that stuff, I don't have time to watch the classics. And it's like, well, I think especially if you're starting out, it's worth making the time, because it's worth going back and, like, really studying those, at least seeing them, at least see those films, like, once, And there's so many resources. Like, ASC puts out a list. They put one out a couple years ago. They updated it. It's like the 100 most important films for cinematography, and it's in chronological order. So it, like, goes back to, I think, Wings or Sunrise, I think, is probably the first one on that list, and then it just goes all the way up to present day. And it's like, it's 100 movies. You've probably seen some of them, and it's like, go back and watch all of them. Like, those really are the movies that every cinematographer should have seen. All of those movies. They're all classics. This isn't the Sight and Sound list. They're not deep cuts. Like, these are classic films that are really worth watching. And then the other one is, to me, cinematography is so much about light, and, like, we've been talking about, like, this pursuit of truth and this pursuit of realism and, creating environments and worlds that feel real and feel convincing and feel lived in. And to me, the way to study that is to study nature. So on the one hand, it's like, watch films, watch movies, understand film language, but also, to me, light comes from nature. And the best way to do that is to just, like, take photos. I think everybody should be an amateur photographer. Even if you're not good at it, it doesn't matter. You're not taking photos for a gallery. You're taking photos for you. And I just think that we all have phones, we all have cell phones that have great cameras these days. And, like, I just encourage people to take pictures all the time. Like, always just be observing light in the real world, like in your apartment, in your yard, on the street, in a store, in a restaurant, when the sun is setting. Like, just always be looking for natural light. And, like, that kind of street photography trains you to look for that stuff. And it trains you to find good light instead of having to artificially create it. And then when you're trained to find good light, it's easier to recreate those conditions because you know what you're looking for. And so that's probably like my biggest piece of specific practical advice is like, if you're not taking photos on your iPhone all the time, like everywhere you go, when you notice like some nice lighting, start now, because that is like the best way to learn lighting for me.
My best photos were the ones I wasn't fast enough to grab that I see. So I just try to observe and like capture those moments, and then I'm always chasing those dragons. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I'm always looking for those street shots.
Yes.
Even if I don't have a camera on me, which I always try to have one, I'm capturing frames that I keep in my sort of memory bank.
100%. And that's the point, though, is like we all have a really good camera on us at all times. So like, might as well use it. Unless you have a flip phone.
Super advice.
Though even flip phones have cameras, I
Worth
think.
a shot, right?
It's always worth a shot. Always worth a shot. But yeah, that's the best I got.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. This is great.
If anyone hasn't already seen The Creator, definitely see it while it's still in theaters.
While it's still in IMAX.
Still in IMAX, right? If you can get to an IMAX screening, I highly recommend you do. It's just the scale of this movie, the VFX, the cinematography, everything about it is just so visually striking that I think you really do get a lot more out of it in that larger format.
Treat yourself. It's nothing short of a treat. It's
Absolutely.
really a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Oren.
Appreciate it.
And
Thank you.
check out Cinematography Salon
Thanks for
thank you.
podcast. And where else can people find you if they're not already following your work?
Yeah, Instagram. I have a website, and the streets of LA. AMC Burbank.
Perfect. Thank you again,
Thanks.
Oren.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming on,
Yeah,
and
this
we'll
is
see you
great.
next week.
Take care.
Bye.
Wow, what a